We have Sue. We have Sue Altman with us tonight, back by popular demand. As a matter of fact, she was the last live program we had at the Jug in August of 2019.
I didn't realize that. Wow.
Yeah, it just occurred to me right now, actually. And it was a great program on the Hudson River School. We were packed to capacity. We had people standing inside. We had people standing outside in the doorways trying to hear. So we're really thrilled to have you back tonight to host you again this evening. Sue is an artist. She's an art instructor and an art historian. She lives and works here in Ossining from her studio, where she paints and she teaches. She lectures on art history widely through the tri-state area. She teaches online. She teaches in person. She's been doing a lot of online this year. And right. Yeah. So she has a wonderful array of lectures that she does on single specific artists, how to identify an art movement, groups of artists like the Hudson River School, African American artists in Dutch Golden Period, and also she does surveys on major museums and what they have. She has taught both in private and public schools, and again, she's doing a lot of online lately. And she's exhibited widely, recently with two local groups, the Ossining Arts Council and the Bethany Arts Community. So tonight she's going to dig a little deeper into the Hudson River School. She's going to be speaking about Frederic Edwin Church, his work, his place in the Hudson River School and beyond that, and his home in Alana, which is now a New York State Historic Site, which is located in Hudson, New York. So now I'm just going to turn it over to you, Sue.
Oh, thank you, Martha. What a lovely introduction. All right, so I am going to do my usual routine here of first muting everyone. So if you have anything to say, do it quickly. And then I'm going to share my screen. So just give me a minute to get that set up. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. So yes, I am going to be digging a little bit deeper than in the last lecture, which was generally an overview of the Hudson River School. And we're looking particularly at one of the practitioners. And Frederic Church is really considered a second generation Hudson River painter. Thomas Cole was his teacher, and I'll go back into that. But let's first concentrate on him in particular. Here's a portrait of him. He was born into a pioneering family. They were one of the founding fathers. In fact, his family actually founded Hartford, Connecticut. So he was from a wealthy family. And at a young age, he did express interest in art and went to study with Thomas Cole. A little bit about his family. As I said, he was a member of this pioneering family. Here is a picture he did of the company that they were with, traveling through the wilderness to Hartford, Connecticut in the year 1636. This painting, by the way, he was only about 20 years old when he did this, so very accomplished painting. And it was the first thing he sold, and he got $130 for it. Here is his wife, Isabel Carnes Church. He married her in 1860, and they had two children, and then very tragically, both infants died from diphtheria. But he did later have 4 more children that you can see here that lived to adulthood. So let's just talk a little bit about the Hudson River School. I'm not going to go into the same depth as in the last lecture. The founder is Thomas Cole. The thing about the Hudson River School, it was really the first purely American art movement. And it concentrated, as you know, of course, on landscape. And this was something that was somewhat revolutionary. Landscape had generally been used as a backdrop for other paintings, paintings of mythology, of history, of religion, not just a subject unto itself, with the possible exception, I guess, of the Dutch Golden Age that also concentrated on landscapes. Those landscapes, however, were very small in scale, very different from the way the Hudson River School presented them. So Thomas Cole was the founder of the movement. Asher Duran was the co-founder. And it really started with these New York-based artists taking journeys up the Hudson River to find these pastoral landscapes. This is one of Cole's famous paintings, The Falls of Catterskill. And he did eventually establish a home in the town of Catskill, which is right across from Hudson, where the Olana, the church house is. So they could kind of wave at each other across the river. Though actually, Cole did die prematurely. He was only in his 40s. So these other artists sort of carried on his tradition. So the idea of the Hudson River School was to really celebrate the beautiful landscapes, the unspoiled wilderness of America, and sort of put themselves on the map as artists that would stand alongside the European artists. There was also this idea of manifest destiny, that this land belonged to these new settlers and sort of led the way for the expansion and the settling and a great deal of negative things as well with colonization. One of the things that Cole's work featured that is somewhat different from what Church was doing is he was really into narrative, the idea of telling a story through his paintings, using these images as allegory. So I just want to show an example. This is called The Voyage of Life. So you see the figure venturing out into the wilderness, going through the rapids and the different difficulties of manhood. Oh, I guess youth belonged, I'm sorry, that was the wrong order. And then finally old age and, going on to the place that they were destined to all along. This is one of Cole's most famous works, and it's not the Hudson River, it's a river in Massachusetts, and it's called the Oxbow. It's at the Met, and the Oxbow is that kind of strangely shaped, hooked kind of river. But what's really significant about this is it exemplifies this sort of dichotomy, this different idea about the wilderness that these artists and Americans in general were dealing with. So you have on the right side, the sort of settled pastoral farmland. And on the left side is the wilderness, unspoiled, wild, and beautiful. There was really a lot of thoughts about what to do with all this land, whether it was ruining it by cutting down the forests and building on them. Of course, that was sort of an unstoppable force that happened. This settling of the wilderness, of course, expanded all across the country, all the way to the west. And the only sort of saving grace here is that a lot of these Hudson River artists were also very vocal in establishing the national park system. So they did manage to preserve large areas of this wild landscape. This is a painting by Church to the memory of Cole. So he really owed a lot to him. He actually studied with Cole for about 4 years, from 1844 to 1848. He paid him $300 a year for that tutoring, and he became Cole's favorite pupil. And you'll see why, of course. Another influence that was going on at the time were some of the European painters. So I just want to go back and look at some of the historical references. We have Claude Lorraine. This is from 1648. So this goes way back. And this is something that Cole really picked up on, this combination of landscape or seascape here and the classical architecture. So you see that quite a bit in his work, not so much in Church's work. But the main influences were the two leading landscape painters in Great Britain at the time. And one was John Constable, and the other was J.M.W. Turner. And they really exemplified a sort of dichotomy of attitudes toward the landscape. So you have the pastoral, as we talked about a little with the Oxbow, and that's definitely shown in this painting by Constable. There was a bit of nostalgia in his paintings, these beautiful bucolic landscapes that were referencing a time that was sort of slowly disappearing as the Industrial Revolution took hold and the population got much more urbanized. And then on the other hand, from the pastoral is what's called the sublime. And that's really shown in the paintings of J.M.W. Turner, who was tremendously influential, not only on these landscape artists, but all the way up into the 20th century, the Impressionists and abstract expressionists. So he was showing effects of light and the atmosphere and weather and sometimes natural disasters in a very loose, very painterly style, really showing the sort of awe-inspiring grandeur of nature and the sort of insignificance of man in relation to it. And then Turner also was very interested in architecture, and you can see there was an interest in going back and looking at the ancient Greeks and Romans and what they left behind. So let's move on to Church himself and some of his early work. And this is a painting he did fairly early. He was still in his 20s at this time. And it's called Morning Looking East Over the Hudson Valley to the Catskill Mountains. Very atmospheric, very much involved in the effects of time of day, of light, of weather, in a way that Cole was really not so associated with. And you have here in the foreground, it's a little bit hard to see, this single figure. Often there are human figures kind of showing scale, usually quite small in relation to the landscape. So this is a similar kind of idea to what was done somewhat earlier by a German Romantic painter named Caspar David Friedrich, and this is a famous painting, The Sea of Fog from 1818. So this is really, you know, the solitary man looking out over the world, contemplating nature and sort of his destiny. This is New England scenery, again, a fairly early painting. This is his first, what's known as a composite landscape. So there were sketches taken at many different locations. By the way, all of these paintings were done in the studio. It wasn't until the Impressionists came along that artists were taking their canvases out of doors and painting in plein air. And some of that had to do with the use of paint in tubes, which wasn't really invented till the latter part of the 19th century. But anyway, so here is a New England scenery, and you can see an emphasis on nature. There's a great deal of detail, and Church was really interested in scientific observation and exploration. These paintings are very smoothly painted as opposed to what Turner did and what some of the Impressionists would be doing in about 20 or 30 years, where you see the brushwork. Here the brush strokes are almost invisible, so the hand of the painter is not as apparent. Here again is that painting of the Hooker Company. And I just wanted to show a little detail of this, just so you can see the tremendous amount of detail that he is putting into the little sections of the painting here. This is called The Wreck. This was painted in Maine at Mount Desert Island. And here you don't really see any human figures. You see a mast that's broken here. It's also forming a cross. So there's a lot of sort of religious imagery that comes across. These artists felt that the landscape was sort of the hand of God, the emanation of God. So they included these symbols like crosses quite often in the paintings. And here he's showing sort of an evening, a sunset scene with the light coming through the clouds. Something I haven't mentioned yet about Church is his great travels and exploration all over the world, and we'll see a lot of that. This was in Ecuador, which he explored a great deal, and he really went all over the world. This is a volcano, and again we see the sun setting in a very sort of dramatic way. This was meant sort of as a parable for the Civil War, as you see the date 1862, sort of the juxtaposition of light against darkness, these clouds massing and the sun shining through. And he believed really, really strongly in the Union and the ultimate victory of the North. And here again, we have the cross in the wilderness. Sometimes it's kind of hard to see these details. You have to really look closely. And another one, so this is getting a little later. This really is emblematic of this style that is called Luminism, which he did much more in his later years. And that was sort of an offshoot of the Hudson River School. Artists like Kensett and Gifford were practitioners of this. And it's an idea of the light being very important in the composition, kind of obscuring the natural features. So it gets this real softness and sort of blurriness of the background. And it's quite beautiful. Now this is one of his most famous, if not his most famous work, The Heart of the Andes. And again, it's from Ecuador. And we see a great deal is going on here. So we have many different ecosystems that he's showing here, from the tropics to the snow-covered mountains in the distance. That's actually Mount Chimborazo from Ecuador. And I want to look a little bit closer at this. So this painting is almost 10 feet wide, really tremendous. It's at the Met. And we'll look at, there's the detail of the mountain in the background. So again, this is a composite landscape. It is not exactly the way it looked. And he just did many different sketches of different sites. And you can see again his attention to detail and the different botanical features. And here we have another section. So this area at the bottom is the thing that's in the red square there. So again, we have a burial scene and the very sort of primitive cross being erected there. So the history of this painting is that it was shown to the public. They made a really big deal out of this. Here's a photograph of the way it was displayed. So there were curtains around it. The lights were dimmed. I believe there was some foliage, tropical foliage around it. And it was shown at this 10th Street studio that he worked out of. About 12 or 13,000 people went by and paid a quarter to view the painting. It was also shown in London in the same way, and had a tremendous effect on the viewers. Apparently women were made faint by it. And there was just this idea of being sort of carried away by the power of the sublime that is shown in this painting. Now we have Aurora Borealis. So he did travel to the Arctic, and he had a friend named Isaac Israel Hayes, who was an Arctic explorer. So he was really fascinated by this. This is also showing, this, very dramatic sky feature that he's showing here, this phenomena. And he did this in part to publicize the writings of his friend, the explorer. And of course, this is also showing that kind of awe-inspiring idea of the sublime. The next work, again, is also from the Arctic. This is also a tremendous picture. It's about 9.5 feet wide. And we have these icebergs. And it was also displayed in New York. It didn't quite get the same attention that the Heart of the Andes did. Of course, the war was raging at this time in 1861. But he's also paying a great deal of attention to the different meteorological effects, the way the ice looks is more recently frozen. The color is different than the older ice. And he did many, many sketches. Apparently, he went out in a rowboat and rowed very close to these icebergs to get a very accurate impression. Apparently, this did not always go over, this painting, with the critics. They felt there was just nothing really relatable here. There was no humanity in the picture, and it just seemed a little too isolating in its emptiness. Now, this painting eventually sold. There's a good story about this. It was sold in England, and no one really knew what happened to it. The artist died in about 1900. It surfaced again in the year 1979 in a home in Manchester, England. It had been there for the intervening 78 years. It was put up for auction. And at this time, there was a renewed interest in church. It was sold for $2.5 million, which was the most of any American painting up to that point. Niagara Falls was something of great interest to Church, and he had visited many times. This is also a very large painting, very wide, and he did a different version as well. this is from the Canadian side, and about 10 years later, he did one from the American side. So this is a vertically positioned painting, and he's sort of placing us sort of in a position where we would actually feel the spray and hear the sound of the cascading water. So really getting that immediate effect. So this one is called Twilight in the Wilderness. And this is showing, I believe this is also in Maine, showing this extremely dramatic sunset, very much influenced by Turner. And this was also sort of a metaphor. This is 1860. And he felt like this was a symbol of the country that was falling into war at this time. And here's another Maine painting. This is Newport Mountain at Mount Desert. And he's showing someone hauling remains of a wreck out of the sea here. And this is a painting that really doesn't look very typical of Church's work. It's called Our Banner in the Sky. Again, a Civil War painting. There was actually a lithograph done of this that was sold to benefit the families of Union soldiers. So it has this sort of impressionistic flag, this sort of tattered flag. The tree in the foreground is serving as the flagpole. And apparently this was referencing a flag that flew over Fort Sumter in South Carolina, which was the site of the first battle of the war. And the flag still was flying there, sort of a symbol of the persistence, the resilience of the Union Army. So as I said, he traveled quite a bit, and he did travel obviously to Greece, as you see here, and he made many studies of the Parthenon. And this one is also at the Met. And he's really showing the Parthenon with all its decay and damage, not the Parthenon the way it looked back in the classical era. This was displayed in the Paris exhibition of '78. And there's another painting from his explorations in Greece. So this is called El Casne and Petra, and also from his travels in the Middle East. And we see this very interesting kind of viewpoint, like sort of through the rocks, through this, you know, the sort of natural window that you're seeing the architecture through. So it's sort of a viewpoint as if you were coming upon this scene. And I'll show you later, this is actually one of the paintings hanging in Olana. And another painting from the Middle East. And a few more paintings of the tropics. This again is a painting that has this idea of luminism, of the sort of bathing of light throughout the painting that sort of gives it almost a spiritual quality. Okay, again, some more views of the tropics. And this one is at the Brooklyn Museum. This is called A Rio de Luz. This was one of his later paintings. And this was a river in I'm sorry. Yeah, it's called the River of Light. And you have sort of the cross being made from the light here. Also, so this is his last large scale painting of South America. And he's not really trying to capture all the different zones of climate in this one. It's a little more focused on a particular site. And this again is Maine. He actually did buy a house in Maine and spent time there. And this was actually his last dated canvas. This is all the way from 1895, about 5 years before his death. So this would have been a view from his house there. And toward the end of his life, he had a different project, and that was to develop this land that he bought on the Hudson. And he was very involved in designing it. It was sort of a collaboration with architects, including, I'm sorry, hold on. Yeah, he worked with, I'm sorry. Sorry about anyway, he worked with other architects on this. It was very influenced by a lot of the architecture he saw in the Middle East. Here's one of the views of the house. So inspired from buildings in Damascus, Jerusalem, and Beirut. And the house was completed in 1872. The name Olana is apparently the name, an old Latin name for a place in Persia, but they've called it for a long time just the farm. And he did spend much of his time in his later years at the house. Some more views of it. And in the later years, one of the visitors to the home was Mark Twain, as well as other important people. And then he was able to actually buy back a great deal of his paintings toward the end of his life. This is a view of what they call the Olana view shed, panoramic views that begin in the Hudson Valley, extend toward Massachusetts, Vermont, and Connecticut. And he not only designed some of the architecture of the house, but also the landscape surrounding it. Since 1992, an organization called Scenic Hudson have protected about 2,400 acres of this land. So a little bit more about the details. There's a lot of different motifs that are done with colored brick, ceramic, slate, tile, and stenciling throughout. And it's really sort of a hodgepodge of different styles, but is quite beautiful. It was inherited by their son. There was actually a cover story on Olana in Life magazine many years ago. New York State purchased the property in 1966, and at that time it was open to the public. It's now considered one of the most important surviving landscapes and buildings in the United States. The landscape, the land has been compared to Central Park by Olmsted. And Vaux, that was the artist that the architect I was thinking of. This is that painting El Casne in Petra that is hanging over the fireplace there. And just a few more items of interest. For Olana tours, you can go to olana.org. And it is open Tuesday to Sunday. And a few of the paintings that you can see in the house. There's also this new feature, this Hudson River Skywalk, and you can actually walk from Olana across the river to the house owned by Thomas Cole in Catskill. It is about a 3-mile walk each way, but that's the new feature that they've added here. And I'm going to end today, and I'll be happy to take questions. But if you think of anything, please get in touch with me. There's my email address, phone number, and website. And I'm going to end that now. And please let me know if you have any questions. Okay, feel free to unmute yourself.
So I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm Betsy. So something that struck me is that he really seems to impose the Christianity in many of his paintings.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And did he do that because you're supposed to do that? Or did he really like integrate Christianity with nature and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. These artists were generally very religious, and they really acquainted, they thought the nature was the way of God communicating, that this was the way to connect with God was through the landscape and through nature. So yeah, it wasn't done, in any kind of cynical way. They really believed it.
Interesting.
Any other questions or comments?
Can I ask, this is Betsy again.
Okay, sure.
So it's like all of a sudden, like you showed Alana, and there was all this Middle Eastern stuff. So like, why do you think he picked that?
Well, he did travel extensively through that region, and I guess it just spoke to something in him. I'm really not sure exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes, I have something I'd like to add to what you said.
Sure.
First of all, he did travel through the Middle East, and he traveled through what is now Jordan, to the place where Raiders of the Lost Ark was filmed, and that Kaznia is actually the way you see it, coming down a break in the rocks called the Seek, and that was very realistic.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know that. I've never been there. That's great.
It's quite startling coming around the bend.
Yeah, sounds like.
And this Kaznia, which is not a actual building, it's just a carving in the side of the rock. So I just add that for you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for a wonderful lecture.
Okay.
Yeah. Really interesting.
Great. Thank you all for coming along, and enjoy the rest of your summer, everyone.
So I have one question.
Sure.
So Olana was it later when he was older, but when he did the large paintings and all that, where did he do it?
Where did he do it?
Where was his studio?
Well, he actually did have a studio in the city, but he also did own the property that Olana was built on for quite a while. He had a smaller house there. I forgot to mention, it was actually called the Cozy Cottage, but you would never call Olana the Cozy Cottage, I don't think. So he did have that site as well. I'm not sure exactly where he did each of the paintings, but obviously they would need quite a bit of space.
Yeah.
And mostly, were most of them so large, or what other?
No, not really. I mean, I guess the icebergs and the heart of the Andes were the the major accomplishments.
Mm.
But they were, they were not small. If you look at the Dutch landscapes, they're very, very small because they were really meant for private homes. These were meant, for large exhibition spaces.
And when
Where
did,
might one see the icebergs? In person?
I am not sure. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll have to look that up.
date-wise, where does photography start?
Well, photography really got its start around the 1820s, 1830s. It was really very primitive back then. It wasn't the artists that first really took notice of photography were, I think, some of the Impressionists, like Degas was very influenced by photography. I don't think it was really considered an important influence at this stage. It wasn't for another 20, 30 years, probably.
They're so photogenic looking.
Oh, I know, they're so realistic.
Mhm.
Incredible.
So pre-photography.
Right.
It's unbelievable. And I
know.
have to say, like, his portrait of his wife was gorgeous. And it makes me think, wow, if he'd gone into portrait painting, he might have, been known that as that. Like, it was, I think it was a really good portrait. It wasn't just, a generic person, right? It was very beautiful and specific and whatever.
Mhm.
I also really, go ahead.
You said that his many of his works were composites. Were any of them actual scenes of that you could go and see?
Yeah, I definitely think, especially those scenes from Olana were probably very true to what he was looking at. But it's hard to say unless you compare it with the actual landscape. But I think something like, where he had to do 100 sketches to get it all together, it became sort of something manufactured rather than observed.
Yeah.
I really love the Niagara Falls paintings. I think because Niagara Falls was a natural, beautiful thing that I believe has been really commercialized now.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was like so powerful when I saw those two photos you showed, Sue, of Niagara Falls.
Beautiful. Yeah.
It was much more almost spiritual than going there.
Yeah, right. You don't have all the souvenir shops around.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. No, it did look really beautiful.
So how does this all compare to the view from your house?
A little more dramatic, I would say. Yeah, we have a lot of trees obscuring the river from my house. But I still love this neighborhood.
Great neighborhood.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I really, really enjoyed it. I mean,
Thank you, Gina.
they're beautiful, the paintings, and just, your presentation of it. So thanks.
Yeah, really good. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. I enjoy doing it.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.